owner isn't interested in developing and is continuing to farm at this time. So there isn't a whole lot left available within the existing city limits for development. The other slide I just wanted to include in here is this is the land use plan from the draft 2040 comprehensive plan. So again, we're looking at this area south of Marsh Lake Road. The Geshtok and Vogel parcels are shown here, and then the Welter property extends to the south side of the railroad track. So if the city council were to move forward with this extension, it would certainly go quite a ways in creating opportunity for development of these parcels that include flex employment and additional commercial development. And now I'm going to turn it over to Kelly to talk about money.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Kara asked that I take a look at what was proposed and come up with some, how would we pay for something like this? So first thing that I looked at was the extending the trunk water main portion. The estimated cost of that is $600,000, and we do have enough in reserves to pay for that, and that's assuming that we would bond for well number 5. We had initially talked about paying for well number 5 with cash reserves, but that was with it being pushed out a couple of years. Under this scenario, we would be doing it in 2019 versus 2021, so I think bonding for that makes the most sense. The sewer improvements portion is roughly $2 million. We would have enough to pay for half of that from reserves, and then we could finance the remaining $1 million. The street portion is $500,000, and I would recommend financing that with bonds. So with that, there's a couple of things to note. Well number 5 is something we already had planned, and it would be done with or without development. And within the sewer improvements, $2 million, $500,000 of that is for a lift station that we had also been planning for in our capital improvement plan. For the bonds, I've got an assumption that they'd be issued for 15 years, which is the typical length that we issue bonds for. And then I've got a 4% interest rate plugged into it. The bonds we plan to issue later this summer, we're expecting about a 3.4% interest rate. So I've bumped that up a little bit because I think interest rates will continue to rise in the next year. Another thing that we're assuming is that although we'll issue the bonds for 15 years, they would have a call provision so that we could repay them early in the event we have funds on hand. So if we do that and paid them off, after 8 years, we would be able to save about 1/3 of the interest cost on those bonds. In terms of what kind of revenues would come in with this development, the water and sewer core and availability fees would each generate about $1.97 million. And then the building permit revenue, which would be based on 500 homes, would be $2 million. So that would lead to revenues of about $5.94 million after a full build out.
And those 500 lots we were projecting off of just the Geshtok and Vogel and Welter properties, even though this infrastructure would also serve essentially, this lift station in Force Main serves our whole future south growth area, so it serves a much larger area than just these properties. So what we're looking for tonight from the City Council is feedback, as certainly to answer any questions the Council might have, but then provide feedback on staff continuing to work on this. If the Council is interested in pursuing this utility extension, the next step would be to issue an RFP for the preliminary engineering work. We would expect that then would be back in front of the Council for approval in that July-August timeframe. We targeted August 13th currently for awarding the engineering. Design would then occur between August and September of 2018. We'd be looking to bid and award the project in the first part of the year, and then begin construction in the spring. That essentially would be the same timeline that the developer is indicating to us that they would be following for the Gashtok Vogel properties. So we would be moving hand in hand with our design while they were working on their engineering plans and going through the preliminary plat approval process, constructing at the same time so that when the utilities are available, then they're ready to build homes and connect into them. And I think with that, we would all take any questions that the council has.
Council?
Can you put the slide with the numbers back up, please? It says estimated cost 4.7 million. If I put the interest in there, which is real, it's not 4.7 million, it's 5.9 million, something like that. Is that true?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so for the benefits of somebody recording this and putting it in the newspaper, the projected cost is 5.9 million, but that doesn't mean I'm not enthusiastic about it. I just wanted to see the numbers right. I have a question further on this gravity sewer that would be used when you get down below the railroad tracks. Does that present some limitations for whoever's building there?
How do you mean?
Well, it's a big area. Is that normal to have a big area just gravity sewer?
Yes.
It is.
That's our preferred.
That's your preferred way to go?
Yes. Yeah, and that the sewer plans and the water extension plans have been laid out dating back to, well, even probably when you did the comp plan amendment in 2004. And we've been updating it through then our 2008 comp plan, our 2018 comp plan, and already put quite a bit of infrastructure in the ground to serve this area. So it really is implementation of the next step of a plan that started back when Mark Kultzis was the community development director.
I assume there's no issue that this land is not contiguous to the city of Victoria now, i.e. the Schmig property in between? That doesn't cause any issues, does it?
Correct. So certainly there'll be more discussion once the new community development director is up to speed beyond 8 hours today. But what Mark and I had talked about was we would anticipate that the city would look at annexing, we would annex the Schmig property, but out past the Schmig property, probably look at all the way going all the way down to 10 and then back over to 11. But we'd be, not extending further east than beyond Schmigs and Gashtoks and Welters. So not into the Hunt Club property at all, since they're not interested in selling anytime soon.
So we would annex it now?
As part of the process.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Council, other questions, comments?
So if we're going to, that's a good thing that you mentioned that. If we're going to annex that extra land, what's happening with the county these days? They started wanting to charge for annexing acreage. So is there another cost here that we need to consider?
So I think you'd be referring to the Laketown Township annexation fee that
Yes.
we had some discussion back. I don't have any information about the current status of that, but I'm wondering if you know what's going on with Laketown Township's annexation fees these days.
Please. Mark, for the record, please introduce yourself too.
Sure. Mayor and Council Mark Kultzis. I'm the consultant who's helping you with community development. As it relates to the fee, there hasn't been a settlement, as so to speak, on what that is, but annexations have continued to be approved by the state board by a couple of different ways, and I don't think that it would hold up our ability to annex that property, but I do anticipate resolution on that fairly soon. So I think you could proceed and get the annexation accomplished, but the fee is in our annexation agreement. It's whether or not it's a legal fee or not is really what
Right.
has been challenged on that. So
I wasn't doubting that you could get it done. I was wondering what additional costs we have to consider.
So the fee is a pass-through fee essentially. So the city would pay the fee to the township and then be reimbursed for that fee from the landowner. So that's how the
But that
fee
adds
was set
a
up.
real
That
cost
adds to the
to
cost.
development.
So that's
It adds to the cost, but the city's cost is a pass-through cost. It adds to the development, the developer or landowner.
well,
side
that's
of it.
good to
Correct.
clarify that, but that
Yeah.
really makes it a little more expensive then for everyone.
Correct.
Are the developers aware of that? For the record, name and address, please.
Dave Gashok, 10100 Victoria Drive. I'm the property owner. I've talked to, Mike Klingelitz. He's on the Lake Township board, and he said, yeah, it's not really settled, but, the fees that they were originally talking about, there's some high numbers. He said, no, that's not fair. There'll be some, minimal charges for the attorney fees and things like that, but they're not out to, rape basically the landowners because they understand the landowner's the one that's going to be paying for it, not the developers, essentially. So they're working for us too. So they don't have, a set policy yet.
What
We
kind
have
of
an
ballpark?
agreement, though. We have an agreement in place that specifies there are no fees.
Right,
Period. That agreement is in place and in force today, and they're attempting to change it.
right. But, I know there's been some legal issues and, amount huge thousands of dollars, and they're not looking for that, they're just looking for something to help set off their legal fees for transferring, I guess, so.
What ballpark are you talking here? A few years ago, we heard $150, $200 an acre.
Yeah, I don't think it's close to that.
Well, what does that mean? Is it 50?
No, because I said, I'm not going to pay $500 an acre, and he said, no, and he can't speak. He's not speaking for the whole board either. That's the thing. But he thought, a few $1,000s possibly.
For the whole thing?
Right.
Oh, well,
Yeah. No, I've talked to him. I've known him most of my life, and I've talked to him several times. I said, no, I want to kind of get this clarified. And they haven't really said this is our policy. But, and they talked about it at one of the meetings. They were having the attorney look at it, and I said, get back to me if there's something different, So that's the assumption we're going on.
And I think it's one thing to have a fee recovery for legal fees, et cetera. There's probably not a lot of debate about that, but my recollection from last time we went through this was they were looking for something more like tax revenue recovery.
Right. And for example, my property was in ag preserve, so to the township, it amounted for over like 5 years' time. I think it was like $3,000-$4,000. And that's what I think they were looking for originally, is for like a 5-year, payoff for the taxes. And he says, well, it really doesn't amount to that much, with your property if you look at that. And that's what I did. So I mean, we're not talking $30,000-$40,000 because I'd be. Scream a little bloody murder there at the meetings, so. But that's what I know of it.
but strictly speaking, according to our agreement, we shouldn't have to pay anything. You shouldn't.
That's your legal thing, whatever. Yeah, I can't, comment on that, so.
Thank you.
Dave, just one question.
Yeah.
You've spoken with developers and that. Are you relatively, is there kind of a verbal agreement in place? I mean, do you have people ready to move on this? I mean, are we at risk of running this down there and then developers pulling back? And
No,
not making
we
a deal?
have, can I state? We do have an agreement struck with D.R. Horton and
Okay.
the representatives here tonight, David, so. If you want him to speak or whatever.
No, I was just curious how,
Okay.
if there was something in
No,
place.
it's real,
Okay.
so we had a couple different developers interested, and we inked a deal with them, so.
Perfect, thank you. Mark, can you come up again for a second, please? While you're coming up, my assumption here is some of these open questions we can get solidified and get input from the city attorney before the time that the council has to actually vote on something to make a decision?
Yes.
Okay, so
Absolutely.
my assumption is that's being examined today so that any of these open questions will have hard facts that we can rely on?
Correct. Yeah.
Right.
that would be
Any
our
idea on timing?
It depends on the direction. I think really from the council, we've been kind of just collecting information, but not putting a ton of resources into this until we'd have direction to actually proceed, and then we would start to compile some of the information you would need to make a full decision. So,
Got it. All right, council, comments, questions?
Go back to the map, please. Zoom out. The bigger one, there you go. So my question was going to be, are we aware of the developers? So we're now aware of one. And you mentioned previously as the lead into this, the Vassar property. Do you know the developer for that?
Yeah, that sketch plat came in last week, and that is Hartman Companies.
Hartman, and then
that's up over
the third one down, who would that be?
On this, there are developers looking at it who may or may not be in the audience. This representative is the developer, part of the development team that did the Meadows property.
And so I think I can draw the assumption here, but just to state it for the record, what types of products are we looking at from these three
Do you want to talk about that?
developers?
staff has seen some sketch level plans, just kind of identifying some concepts in what they would do. Predominantly a single family product, some potential detached or attached villa type product like we've seen, but very commensurate with the 2040 at least draft of the comprehensive plan as far as land use goes.
So these would be R1 and R2?
R2, R3
R2,
I think
R3?
so.
is probably just based on the lot width for what they'd be proposing.
Thank you.
All right. Did you want to say anything or address the council? Not required, but
Sure. I'm Matt Pavick with Golden Valley Land Company, and we're working on the Walter parcel. So we're just really early. Don't have really anything to tell you of detail, but we are definitely looking at it and interested. So
perfect. Thank you. Council, any more comments, questions?
Is there any foreseen change to the use of the rail corridor? Is that expected to continue to be an active rail line?
That's what I recall to be accurate.
Yeah, come on up. Name and address for the record, please.
I'm Dave Schmidt with D.R. Horton. Mr. Mayor, council members, Kara, staff, thank you very much for this opportunity. We're very excited to be working with the landowners. Brent Hislop from Synergy Energy. Synergy has done a wonderful job. Kara, thank you for all your work thus far. The timeline that Kara has laid out is in unison with what we're thinking. The type of product is what you've heard is what we're thinking. We have a lot of work to do, and our staff, our entitlement staff, is looking forward to working with you in the future. We hope to have this thing started in the spring, and we thank you very much.
Thank you. Council, any other comments, questions?
We got one other question. Could you put up the financial schedule once again? My favorite. I think it'd be good if we talked about how this might affect taxpayers. And we're looking at the interest on the bonds. I'll tell you what I think, Kelly, and then you slap me, you don't correct me. But this $600,000 for well number 5, that's going to be funded through our enterprise fund, i.e. the water fund. So it's not going to show up in anybody's assessed value assessment. It's not going to be in the tax levy.
That's correct, and it would not require any increase in the quarterly utility bills
Okay.
either.
The sewer improvements, the $1 million, that's the same thing, I believe. It's going to be
That's
funded
correct.
through the enterprise fund. It's not going to affect anybody's tax levy.
That's correct, and no change other than we're planning for 2% increases in sewer, and those would
Right.
continue.
Yeah. And then the 193,000, that's a street that would flow through the tax levy. So it'd be a couple $100,000 over 15 years.
It would, however,
Plus,
500,
plus the actual principal. So
Right.
700,000 over 15 years,
yes.
which
However,
is minimal per year.
500 new homes valued at roughly 400,000 each would generate, if we kept our same tax rate, about $660,000 in annual general fund revenue.
Right, so we wouldn't even see it.
So it could
Basically.
be recouped in 1 year theoretically.
So the bottom line, this isn't, we don't have to raise taxes to pay for this as it's projected now.
No.
Far from it, it goes the other way. It gives us more tailwind.
Yes, and the other thing I did this afternoon is I looked at our sewer fund and I extended my projections out to 2028, which would be, in theory, the time we would have these bonds paid off. And if we went forward with this and continued development, we'd have about 2.2 million in that fund. If we didn't move forward and the city was limited in its growth, we would have about 1.7 million in the fund. So it's about a $500,000 difference by the time 2028 rolled along.
And looking at the 15 years, that's very prudent, that because this is not going to take, if there's not a major recession, this isn't going to take 15 years to build out. It could be a lot quicker, like
Yeah, if you look at our
5 or
prior developments, they're
7.
usually built out, in 3 to 5 years.
So that's something, even if something happens where we get sucked into a major downturn, economic downturn, the city is not going to be sitting out there. So this, to me, these numbers look really good.
Is there any pieces of this where we have money in an existing fund to avoid borrowing any money at all? Or would you still recommend that we bond for portions of this?
I looked at all of our funds and what we have for cash reserves and recommended where I thought it would be safe to use some of the reserve funds for these ones in particular. In terms of our other funds, we really have projects earmarked, or we've done some other interfund borrowing, so I don't think we could really avoid the financing part of it.
All right, thank you.
Just one more question, Mayor. Going back to the map, on that connection from the Leonard development going south, is that a full street connection? Is that going to be another connection for that full development to get to Marsh Lake Road?
Correct. So what we talked about, so this is the Laketown 11th preliminary plat, and Lennar was showing a connection to Marsh Lake Road from the development in a location that we've concluded to not be advantageous, both from an engineering perspective and an impact to the property owner on the south side of the road. So we'd be going in and constructing this connection ahead of development. The Schmiegs who own this parcel are not, they're interested in continuing to farm, so we wouldn't want to wait for them to, 30 years from now to decide to develop before we put these utilities and street connection in through here.
So for those residents, this is a big plus in that whole area.
Yeah, the Schmiegs have been interested. Certainly, they'll be interested in what the actual details are once we actually start preliminary engineering and look at the road alignment, and we'll engage them and involve them as we work through that process.
And I assume they've agreed to concept to allow us to do that?
They agreed to talk about allowing them to do it, but of course, till they see the details of engineering, I'm sure they'll want to reserve the right to really say how they feel once they know more about what the impacts are. But generally, yes, they would much prefer the location of the road connection to be here instead of right across from their homestead.
Got it. If you can go back to the calendar sequence of events. There you go. So prepare scope and solicit proposals for engineering, is that when that engineering work related to that would be done and an agreement would have to be reached?
Correct. So we would do that proposal work, and then the city council would need to authorize a consultant to do the engineering work, and then they would start by doing topographic surveys and laying out detailed plans, and we'd be meeting with the landowners like we would on any project through that process to get feedback. So then that work would be ongoing through the end of 2018 before we would go out for bids.
So there's a bit of a risk there in the sense that we could expend funds to go ahead and do this, and then if we couldn't reach an agreement, we couldn't put the road in, correct?
Correct, unless we wanted to go through condemnation for the road, which I don't imagine we'd want to be in that boat. But we have a interested party participating, which is often a lot better than one finds themselves in these situations. So,
Got it. Thank you. Council?
Nothing.
We
Right.
probably won't have a problem with the road. I mean, the road, could that just throw this whole thing out of kilter?
if it is, we wouldn't have to build that road. We could go back to having Lennar build the other road in the less desirable location, but the sewer and water lines should come through that location because that's going to be the most cost-effective location for them to be extended. So, again, I'm not worried about it as I sit here today, based on conversations with them to date. So,
All right, thank you. Anything else? Doug, do you need anything from the council tonight?
I just what I'm hearing is support and direction to move forward with the engineering, and certainly I would imagine the developers looking to get that head nod feedback from the council so they can get to work on their planning portion. So we don't need any motions, but just I'm
Council?
hearing that we have direction to move ahead.
Thumbs up.
Any objection? It sounds like it's unanimous. Go ahead. All right, let's go ahead. Thank you. Let's go ahead and switch back. Did Laura have to leave? Okay. Councilmember Striegel, I know you were delayed. You didn't get a chance to talk to Laura. What's the council want to do, given that we talked to the other candidates a while ago? We heard from Laura tonight. It's on tape if you want to review it. Should we go ahead and delay the appointment until the next council meeting to give council members a chance to review the past candidates and Laura, who spoke tonight, or do you want to proceed tonight?
Just with respect to Laura, I did speak to her by phone when she initially applied as one of the candidates on the first go-around, so I'm comfortable, at least from that respect tonight.
Okay, council agreed to move forward?
I'm a little bit frustrated with Mr. Is it Briger? He's an architect, which we've had an architect on the planning commission before, and it's proved to be very, very beneficial. So I'm really curious as to why he didn't make it tonight.
Mr. Mayor, we reached out to him. We just didn't hear a response back from him for this meeting, so I don't know.
Can I ask just how far in advance? I mean, has it been several days or several hours, or how far did we?
We notified him after the last meeting because it was going to be in May 14th. So I've been in conversations with him since then, but it's like he dropped off, so I don't know.
So it's been 6 weeks.
And your last indication, Cindy, from him was?
Last week, like probably Tuesday, Wednesday.
And at that point, he was still interested in participating?
I haven't heard from him. I sent
Oh, okay. That kind of
So it's
directional in my mind.
possibly could be on vacation for, I mean,
Right, so unless the council has any other comments or questions about the candidates that are on the screen,
I have one.
go ahead.
Jacob Cervais, he was on the planning commission before and then was not reappointed, but he's very knowledgeable, and he was a good person on that planning commission. Is he interested in this? Is he truly interested in this substitute?
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Vaughn, he is, I would remind you that his attendance was one of the worst on the
Was it?
planning commission.
Okay.
Okay, any other comments? All right, we're going to take a recess until the council meeting, which starts in about 15 minutes. Thank you.
These were sitting here. Somebody's glasses. Hey, Merle.
We're not supposed to be yellow.
That looked just
Yeah.
There, it's white.
There are sandwiches in there too. Thank you. Sandwiches. Thank you. Grab a quick bite.
Then all of a sudden we have to pay premiums or something to get room. I mean, do we
Yeah, it'd be preferable, of course, to have land rights.
How's your summer going?
Fee, I don't know.
I was just thinking that when you said that. It's going to be July.
Hours, $1,000. And here, whatever, it's gonna be 20, 50,
Fast.
$100,000. It'd be nice to have property interest.
I mean, just to move it over.
Getting out on your boat?
The reason I asked that question is I don't want to committed on that. Nope. And all of a sudden they say,
She's gonna do that twice a month.
Oh, really?
that doesn't mean they're committed.
Yeah.
We're starting to.
A recordable real estate interest, but it's a contract, and we can, push came to
Good evening, everyone. I call to order the June 25th, 2018 meeting of the Victoria City Council. First order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, Doug, Council, changes to the agenda. Doug, anything?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Council? I move we adopt the agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. The agenda is adopted. Open forum. I don't have any slips. Is there anybody in the audience that would like to address the council?
There was this. Mr. Mayor, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Judy, name and address for the record, please.
Hi, Judy Black, 1938 Woodstone Drive. I just wanted to find out more about the town hall meeting that you had proposed, and when you had it, if you were going to, you talked about doing it again, and I think that's a good idea. And I was kind of wondering if possibly you could alternate, like, one council meeting and then a town hall meeting so that we can say things and talk, and then you guys can decide after that. So I was kind of hoping maybe you could do something like that.
Yeah, I mentioned before that we'd hold another one. I can't remember. I think I said end of July. Doug, do you remember?
Mr. Mayor, I'd suggest that if you want to, that last Monday in July, which is an extra Monday, it's the 30th.
So I think something like once a quarter, depending on
Once
how well
a quarter?
they're. Yeah, there's no set schedule. It depends on how they're attended and how much interest there is. But I'm not opposed to holding more.
Well, I know because you had it on a Wednesday night, which was difficult for me. I worked until 9 o'clock that night, so I only got to watch it. Some of the things that you discussed, I did like. I just think it would be a good idea, since you're trying to do the transparency thing, that you do offer that and that council agrees to it.
Right. We will. It'll be coordinated. It'll probably be end of July.
Okay, and then your idea about everybody being down here, I like that as well. But when I was watching, we did have trouble hearing people in the audience, so I was hoping maybe you could set up a mic situation so that it could be more one-on-one and being able to talk. Kind of like
what I'd like to do is be able to get a mic that we can pass around so that people don't have to keep running back and forth. So I heard the same thing after the fact. So, Doug, is that something we can look at and bring back to the council?
Mr. Mayor, my understanding is we do have a mobile mic that could work.
Okay, so we plan to have that at the next one.
Okay, good. And then, I know you've got a big meeting planned, and I don't want to step on any toes here, but I did have a question about the team of residents that have been helping you review the policy book and stuff. And I was wondering, at what point, when did you ask for help? Because I missed that.
In the actual town hall, I told people, this is available online through the city website. The ordinances are all there. So anybody can go and look up the ordinances themselves. Doug, remind me after the meeting. I'll give you the policy book. We can leave that at the front desk if anybody wants to come in and get a copy of it.
Judy, I think we're going to actually have that as an agenda topic later on tonight.
Okay.
To go through those list of questions that were brought up.
All right. Well, as soon as we have the town hall meeting, I think that's going to be a good thing for everybody.
Okay. Anybody else? Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. Nothing else. Anybody want to make any changes or pull anything off the consent agenda? Public, staff, Doug, council?
I make a motion, we approve the consent agenda.
Second, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Consent agenda is approved. Next item, visitor presentation. Doug?
Mr. Mayor, I'm happy to tell you that Pat Smith, our new Community Development Director, is here tonight. Let me give you a few background on him. He has a BS in economics from University of Wisconsin, Eau Claire. He has an MS in Urban and Regional Planning, University of Wisconsin-Madison. He started his career in the city of Chaska. He worked in a number of other interim communities here in Minnesota and one in Washington, St. Louis Park, Richfield, and Burien, Washington. Most recently, Pat has been the planning director for the city of Excelsior. For the last 4.5 years, Pat lives in Minneapolis with his family, and we're excited to have him here. Pat, do you want to have any words?
No, the only thing I have to say is I'm really excited.
You got to talk up here, then. The fans at home want to see you.
Thank you. It's going to be a pleasure. I'm not a very vocal person, so I wanted to keep my comments short, but I'm just really excited about working for Victoria. You have a lot of promising things, and that's what excited me about the position. So thank you, and I look forward to working with you.
Welcome aboard.
Welcome. Thanks. Welcome.
Thanks, Pat. The next, Ann.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This evening, I would like you to also meet our newest member of our Public Works team, Ryan Lowe. He started, I think, in May. Yep. And comes from a landscape background and maintenance background. He's a resident of Victoria and has quite a few relatives and close ties with the community. And we've kind of placed him in the downtown area this year and has done spectacular so far with ensuring that our concerts and classic cars are hit. So with that, I will introduce Brian.
Well, appreciate the kind words, Ann, and I'm happy to be here. Truly grateful for this opportunity. Like she said, I've been a part of Victoria pretty much my whole life. Got a wife and 2 kids, and no disrespect, but as soon as we're done here, I'm going to boogie up to Lions Park to coach my son's t-ball game. So
that was one of the reasons why we hired him as well. So.
Yeah, just grateful to be here and look forward to representing the city of Victoria and for many years to come.
Well, nice to meet you. Welcome aboard.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just thought it would be nice to bring our new employees to meet the council and have people at home be able to see them. So
I think that's
we'll continue doing that.
That's a great idea.
Perfect. Thanks, Doug. Next, citizen survey. Tom Miller. Tom, if you would, name and position for the record.
My name is Tom Miller. I'm president of National Research Center. We're out of Boulder, Colorado. I feel like I'm just going to take this. Thank you. Mayor Funk and members of council, thank you for inviting me, and thank you, Doug, and staff members as well. I also wanted to thank Cindy Patnode, who is the city clerk, who's helped us as well as Doug to make sure that the questions that we're asking in the survey are the questions that matter most to Victoria. National Research Center does these kinds of surveys all across the country, and we've done this now twice. This will be the second time, second report to you, the last one being in 2015. These citizen surveys are considered by many people across the country to be kind of the bottom line in local government. There is no real economic bottom line, except that everybody's got to balance budgets. But what people think is often the fundament of what is important to what council members and staff have to do to make decisions about what to do next. As I go through these results, and the results come in 4 kind of meaty reports, and tonight I'm just going to do a broad overview and talk about, say, I think there are 4 key findings that we want to discuss with this PowerPoint. We are an independent and unbiased research firm. As I mentioned, we're out of Colorado. There's the good and the bad. I mean, we don't know exactly what goes on in this town, but what we intend to do is to report to you what we have heard. In a sense, we're not creating information, we're uncovering information that already exists. And so as I go through this presentation, I'd like to invite you to ask questions or make comments. I don't think you have to wait till the end. I think I'd also like to challenge council and staff to be thinking about what these results mean and what you can do about what you understand these results to mean. I think one of the biggest challenges that I have found doing this for many years in many states is that elected officials and staff members get the information, and the communication piece is very strong. there's a lot of transmission of information and receipt of information, but acting on information takes a lot of creativity and thoughtfulness, and of course this is not the only source of information that you have to make judgments about the community, but is a unique source and a unique window into your performance. So with that said, we'll just go through. This is a way to bring in the voice of the typical resident. That's the intention, that these results are intended to be representative of all of the adults who live in Victoria. National Research Center has been doing this kind of survey research over 20 years. I founded the company after leaving local government. I used to work in city government, and I, with a couple of colleagues, wrote a couple of books about how to do these citizen surveys because we were doing them. We were the first to collect data to be able to report on benchmarks of opinion. There's benchmarks on other kinds of performance, but to understand what people think about their local governments from across the country often can be very helpful in terms of you here in Victoria being able to interpret what the results we find here to mean. So we'll keep that in mind as we go through these results. We have been a long-term partner of the International City-County Management Association. I don't know how inside that is. That's a membership organization for city managers all across the country. We're members of the American Association of Public Opinion Research Transparency Initiative. I mention that because we think it's important not just for us, but for the credibility of what we're delivering to you from the perspective of your residents to go by standards that our professional organization has for telling people what you've done. So we are, in our reports, in our technical appendix in particular, we make very clear about what the methods are that we have used as we have conducted this survey. We've done the survey for 400 jurisdictions in 43 states, and even though the presentation tonight is to you in local government, we think very strongly that the idea of having these results is to bring in other stakeholders, because the quality of life in Victoria is not just to rest on the shoulders of the elected officials of local government. There are other nonprofit organizations, there's the private sector, there are residents in general who are keenly aware and who have responsibility for making this community as good as it is and going forward sustaining or improving. Our results are, and the survey is constructed to give you results in 8 different facets of community. And so these are the 8 facets. There's an overall quality of community that is part of this. And as we do the analysis and have done the analysis, we do it in these 8 categories of community characteristics. So what did we do? It's called the National Citizen Survey, but folks here who participated never had to be confronted with that. This was the Victoria Citizen Survey, and we collected data between mid-February and early April of this year. The data were collected via mostly U.S. Postal Service. People also had the option to respond on the web. There was a separate survey done through an online link that allowed anybody who wanted to participate. We didn't get a lot of respondents there, but and we did not interweave those responses with the ones that were done through our random sampling of the public. You had a very strong response rate. There were 1,500 households that were chosen at random. Within a household, a person was asked without bias to participate. It was really the person who most recently had a birthday. That's how, in essence, we take the responsibility of who gets to choose to participate out of the hands of the recipient, and we intend to keep that. The margin of error around our responses is about 4 percentage points in all survey research, and I know that you're familiar with a lot of it. There is a margin of uncertainty because you have, in this case, a little over 600 people representing thousands of adults who live in the community. The comparison data come from this, and this is kind of a schematic, map, but the listing of all the jurisdictions to which Victoria was compared for our benchmark comparisons is in the back of our benchmark report that you have received. So let's get right into the results. And here's the broadest overview of 134 comparisons. That is, there were 134 questions that could be compared, the answers of your residents in Victoria to the residents of often hundreds of other communities around the country. And these are the findings. Those that, as you can see here, about an equal number above and below our comparison cities, and many similar to the comparison cities. Just as examples, those that were above other places is Victoria is a place to live. This community is a place to live. People's sense of safety here, how they feel about walking and ease of travel here. K through 12 education. There were fewer victims of crime and fewer people who were under housing stress, and that means paying more than 30% of their household income on housing. Worse than other places, just as an example among these 24, public transportation, public parking, jobs and shopping opportunities, an overall sense of confidence in local government. We asked people among these 8 facets which ones were most important for the city to be paying attention to in the coming 2 years. And the economy and natural environment were the two that rose to the top. In almost every other jurisdiction, the economy is one of them, and the other one is not natural environment. It's safety. So this is something that is not entirely perfectly unique, but it's something that's uncommon, that we see that those two are extremely important for your residents. So let's go through these.
Question?
Sure.
So does that mean, or can you draw an assertion that people feel safe here, so they didn't feel that that was rated, or is there any relationship there?
You know, I guess I would not necessarily make that conclusion, because there are a lot of places where people identify safety as an important thing for their government to pay attention to, but they don't feel unsafe. That said, people do feel safe here. And so whether that's the reason they left it off, I don't know. It could just be. And by the way, it's not left off. This is a ranking, and it just came.
Because that surprises me too.
below.
I would have guessed safety to be higher too.
I think I think it speaks to something about how important the natural environment is to your residents. So here's the first key finding. People really do appreciate the quality of life here and the natural environment, and here are some of the things that support that perspective. The 9 in 10 folks giving excellent or good ratings to the overall quality of life, and Victoria is a place to live, their neighborhoods. This city is a place to raise children, and its overall appearance, very strong positive ratings, and several of them higher than we see in other places. People also intend to stay here and are interested and willing to recommend this as a place to live. In terms of the natural environment, these are very high ratings from your residents as well. In terms of the overall quality of the natural environment, the cleanliness of this city, and the air quality here. 9 in 10 folks also recycle from their homes. Recycling is a bigger deal across the country these days than it used to be, but it's particularly big here. The trail system is well used. 80% of the folks have used this trail system in the last 12 months, and they rate it highly. 8 and 10 give it an excellent or good rating, the system itself. Let's go to the second key finding. It has to do with mobility. Where there are generally strong ratings, you can see these are categorized into those that are higher, similar, or lower than our comparison communities all across the country. The arrows tell you that they have either increased, that is improved, or decreased since 2015 when we did the survey last. And I want to say that this is, I mentioned that this is the second iteration, but in a sense you're investing in this trend line, and investing in data these days is a pretty big deal, especially when it's about your own community. And so this is an opportunity for you to start to build this trend line, and gives us an opportunity to say, here's what's gotten better, what's gotten worse, or what stayed the same in these last 3 years. And you can see that overall ease of travel, car travel, traffic flow have not gotten better, they've gotten worse, so has ease of public parking. Snow removal improved. We asked about the downtown parking solutions. The preferred fixes are shown here. The number one being pretty strongly acquiring the additional property in the core to expand parking lot behind Vic's Bar and the Victoria House. Very close after was building a low-profile two-level parking deck. And I say that because it had almost the same percentage of folks who strongly supported it. It's the third bar down. But these were fairly close, these three at the top: purchasing or leasing the grass lot on the corner of Highway 5 and Rose Street and development into a surface parking lot. These were all strongly supported. And there wasn't a ton of opposition, except in the very last option, which mentioned a 1% food and beverage tax increase. About 3/4 of your residents felt that trail construction and maintenance was essential or very important. And then we asked folks in the open-ended question what they thought the biggest challenges were. And mobility, this big category, I guess I'd call it, mobility, parking, traffic, or trail connectivity, all mobility issues were the second most often mentioned biggest challenge for the community. We asked people about their trail use. Folks want to go downtown, they want to go to restaurants and retail on the trails. And in terms of what can be done, it's connectivity. Far and away the most important, most likely improvement that folks would like to see. Let's go to the third key finding, and that has to do with leadership in Victoria. And we can take a look at what residents thought about the quality of services here, 73% giving an excellent or good rating. This was about the same that we see on average across all of the other benchmarks, but it's down from where it was in 2015 when it was 81%. But these services that you can see on the right side of the slide are the ones that are higher than other places across the country. Most others were about the same. Library use and quality ratings went up quite a bit, and I talked to staff a little bit about that. Since 2015, I think you have a new library. Is that right? Okay. We'll come back to that later, but the ratings for the library and the use of the library has gone way up. On the matter of public trust, these ratings have gone way down. And I think from the perspective of someone who is not a local and has an outsider's point of view, and if I hadn't read anything in the paper, I would say these survey results are remarkable nonetheless. And I would be coming to you and saying, we don't usually see this, and what's going on? I'm not asking that question. But there has been a steep decline, and I think in part what it tells us, besides several of these ratings about public trust being below what we see in other places, they've gone down quite a bit since 2015. So the investment in the 2015 survey, I think, pays off a little bit for you to understand what the impact of what folks see happening at City Hall has on their perspectives about these various questions about the overall direction, confidence in government, acting in the best interest, being honest, treating all people fairly, those kinds of things. The overall image, by the way, that was a rating, a separate rating, that also declined. It's still about the same as it has been across the country, but it went from 86% down to 76%. We also ask folks in an open-ended question. That's just, at the end, what's the biggest challenge? Lots of folks mentioned leadership, what's happening at City Hall. There was a combination of council and mayor, just council, just mayor. A large percentage, 70% of the 600 people who participated in the survey had something to say. We don't usually see that. In the open-ended questions, it's kind of like homework. I don't want to have to write an essay. I don't want to say something. Folks seem to be quite willing to do that and weren't put upon. So it's a strong finding. The economy is our last key finding. It's the fourth one. Lots of strength, but more to do. You can see that the downtown area rating and ratings for business and services, Victoria is a place to visit, and shopping opportunities have all improved since 2015. And so something good is happening, and the residents notice. And I mentioned that in a sense it's two separate things, because good things can happen and residents don't always notice. So when something's done that's extraordinary, that's when the needle moves. And it can be a capital improvement like building a library, or it can be doing something in the downtown, or having improvements or problems in other parts of administration. People also want to go downtown on your trails, so downtown's a place that has potential, it seems. We asked people about how important a grocery store is, and 8 and 10 thought it was very important or essential. And they also added that in the open-ended questions, when we asked people what they thought was the biggest challenge, adding a grocery store was right up there in terms of one of the things folks wanted to have happen. There are other unique questions that we asked. And this is really a report of that grocery store finding. This is the quantification of it. Percentage of folks who were saying essential or very important. And then followed by trail construction and maintenance and downtown expansion as the third. And you can see the others. Usually when we ask people about importance of amenities, on average, the majority of people think all the amenities are important, whatever the amenities are that you list. But there definitely is a gradation, and you can see which ones are felt to be most important. This also was the question we asked in the open-ended question, how would you address the biggest challenges? And improving city government leadership, that's a broad category. 41% of the folks said this. And of those, about half said mayor and council. About 20% of the rest said council. About 28% said mayor. And it's hard to intuit what people are thinking. The word council is in there, so it gets counted in one category. The word mayor gets counted in a category. And when they talk about both, that's they have to say both words to get counted in that category. So, in summary, you've got high ratings of quality of life, people intending to stay, the air, the natural environment, cleanliness, the trail system, all these point to a very strong quality of life here. In terms of mobility, ease of travel is about the same as we see in other places, but car flow, parking, public transportation, these are areas that have gone down or are worse than we see in other places. And I would say in terms of the leadership, the unfavorable news has promoted unfavorable ratings. In terms of the economy, it's improved. A lot of improvement since 2015. The downtown and shopping and job opportunities and shopping opportunities still remain lower than in other places, but they're improving. So a lot of folks say, so what do we do now? And I think because there's so many data points, it can be overwhelming sometimes to know how do you start and where do you start. We often recommend that these kind of data be brought to other stakeholders, to be discussed by elected officials and brought to other stakeholders, have them participate in thinking about where to focus your energies for improving the community as your residents have now reported to you what they think is working well and what needs to be improved. And I'll come back to the library again as a great example of a huge improvement in 3 years. Now, that took some capital expense, but I mention it because I think it's important not to feel so overwhelmed that you think, well, gee, there's nothing we can do. We just got all these data, but how do we move the needle? So there's definitely ways to move the needle. These 6 E's at the bottom of that slide are just examples that we give, and anybody who's participated in the National Citizen Survey has access to what we call our playbook, which has case studies of how people have improved their communities using survey data and going beyond the data to action. We run something called the Next Step Workshop. If folks want to talk about it with us leading a facilitated discussion, that's something we do too. But certainly, whether you do it with us or just on your own, we think it's very important that this is not just an exercise in listening, but also acting. Thank you, Mayor. That's the summary.
Thank you. Council questions? Comments? Seeing none, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next item, Doug, new business, 6A.
Mr. Mayor, Council has previously approved the formation of a Water Quality Committee, and tonight we'd like to have you adopt their marching orders, if you will, and then appoint the committee. They've met twice. Very good group. I think they're very ambitious. Mayor, I know you were at the first meeting, and I think it's going to be a good asset for the city to have this committee to give advice to the City Council and the Planning Commission in areas of water quality concerning the lakes. And so I would encourage you to adopt the resolution we have here tonight, which sets up the committee and sets up its responsibilities. Do you have the next slide, Kara? That,
Do you want?
well, okay.
Do you want to see the resolution?
Yes. The committee has recommended that this is what the committee will be. We're talking about 7 major lakes in Victoria, each one having a representative, and then 2 at-large members. And then the committee focus, if you can go up just a bit, the 3 things that they think we should focus on are recommending improvements to the existing city ordinances, recommending projects and prioritizing projects that impact water quality, and then bringing emerging water quality issues to the attention of the City Council. So I want to make sure that those are the 3 things that the council would agree with that this committee should focus on. That's what they're presenting back to you. And then we set up some standard operating procedures for any committee. This will be an open meeting, committee meetings, and we will have minutes and record their meetings. They'll use Robert's rules and standard operating committee. So with that, Mr. Mayor, I'd entertain any questions you might have.
Thank you, Doug. Just for note for everybody, they wanted to change the name from Water Quality Committee to Lakes and Water Quality Advisory Committee, correct?
Right.
Formally change it? Okay. Council, questions, comments?
That was a good move. I think it makes.
Oh, agreed.
Can we go back to the three goals or the charges of the I don't want to abbreviate this, but the LQUAC. Sorry. So number one is recommending improvements for the ordinances and then aligning with the watershed district and the LMCD, et cetera. One of the key challenges, I think, when we've talked about various governing bodies around water has been the number of different organizations that have jurisdiction purview over water in Victoria. And I think we would all agree it's a really important, huge part of what makes Victoria, Victoria, City of Lakes and Parks. So the question that I have is, how do we get that alignment? What is the sort of the tool or the mechanism if there's, you know, a difference of opinion about the direction? I mean, is that the role of the new committee to bring those bodies together, or what? How does that play instead of becoming another body? How does it become kind of the glue?
Well, and related to that, there is a third body that should be listed on there, and I cannot remember the formal name, but I was just added to it. It's the Chaska Watershed District or something like that. Half of Lake Town was moved over to that from Minnehaha Creek.
Carver County WMO.
Thank you.
We can add that.
Yeah, that should be added, please.
Is that a layer on top, or is that an additional?
Pier to Minnehaha Creek for a different watershed district.
As we grow south, we'll be growing into Carver County WMO, so that'll be a new experience for us as we develop south of Marsh Lake Road. That drains.
The county divide there?
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, I think this committee recognizes the complexity that they're in the middle of, and we've had some people on here actually have been on watershed boards, so they understand it. And one of the things that they have agreed to do is to reach out to all those organizations after you form them tonight and let them all know that this committee exists and that they're willing to work with them. And then what they've talked about doing is when they work on particular issues like the shoreline ordinance or whatever, to bring representatives from those bodies in to work with them. So I think they're very much interested in trying to put the whole thing together, but it's clearly a complex thing, and they're well aware that they're not going to solve the zebra mussel problem or all the other issues in water quality, but try to give the city council and the planning commission some guidance on your major. You had three ordinances with the shoreline, the waterways, and there's one more mainly that head onto the water quality in Victoria, and those are the ones that they've highlighted as the ones they're going to look at first.
I mean, I think this is a really great opportunity to have people very specifically invested in Victoria working to bring all those disparate voices together in a cooperative way. So I think it's great. I know over the years, Kara has struggled with who do I report to, or who do I answer to, or how do we make something that we, the city, can follow that we know satisfies everyone. So I look forward to this group's work to help do that and answer those questions.
A couple quick points. It's just an advisory committee, so they don't have decision-making ability, but they can dig into these issues and to bring forward things to the council to review and approve to say, hey, how can we improve on this? And then secondly, to Councilmember Striegel's comment, I would encourage this committee, and in fact every committee, that if there is a group of people that are in any of these committees that have a differing point of view, so you don't have a consensus built, that any report they bring forward should present both sides of any particular issue. And I would encourage them to do that, right? I'm not looking for, at least in my own opinion, I'm not looking for a unanimous decision. I'm looking for them to dig into details and give options to the council, both pro and con, for any particular action they may recommend.
Mr. Mayor, I'm sure they'd be willing to do that. I should also mention that they are also welcoming representatives from all the other smaller lakes, and they've said that they would be happy to have those people come to their meetings. They wouldn't be formal members, but they would certainly listen to them and just be listening members. And because there is some concern that there are some other smaller lakes that people have some concerned about. So I think that's good.
Got it. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, it also sits in this resolution that gives the council the authority or the suggestion to appoint a liaison with this committee if they want to, and you certainly could do that at some point.
So, council, I attended the first meeting to kind of give them just conceptually some of the ideas I had when I brought this idea forward. I don't mind serving on it, but it's up to the council to decide. I do believe that we should appoint a council representative like we have on the other committees.
Can we just take a minute just to talk about that liaison role? We've had it in some committees consistently, some kind of off and on. And I guess for me, the question is, if you're the liaison, are you speaking for the council to the committee, or are you listening? Are you, would it be better to simply have, the leader of the committee address the council when the council has questions for them? I'd just like to understand, kind of what the group's perspective is on liaisons and how they function.
Council comments?
Well, we used to have a liaison for the Planning Commission, and that was discontinued for different reasons, various reasons. So, you don't need a liaison if there's good communication. On the other hand, this is a new committee, and maybe some closeness to the council would be warranted. I'm going to jump back a subject here before we finish talking about liaisons. I'm looking at the committee focus, and the number one focus, first of all, I like the concept of this committee, so don't get me wrong, but the number one focus is to recommend improvements of city ordinances. So to me, this committee is being formed to improve the quality of lakes and maintain the quality of lakes, or is it being formed because people are ticked off with the council and the way the ordinances have operated? So if this is, if this is an ordinance fixing mechanism that's being formed, that sits a little bit askew with me, because I would opt for a more idealistic approach where we're really trying to work with the other agencies in the area, because you can't do it alone, and trying to improve the quality of lakes. And in doing that, you may run into some ordinances that need improvement, and you'd have to work with the respective city council. But to have that as your number one focus, it says recommend improvement. My number one goal in life is to recommend improvements to existing city ordinances. To me, that's something's askew already.
I think that's a valid point. To me, it's broader than just that, although changes to ordinance is obviously something that they need to look at and bring recommendations forward. But to me, these other government bodies that deal with parts of the watershed also have annual budgeting processes, and they look for input from the city of Victoria. I would view this committee as looking at what those requirements are and helping the city draft what Victoria would like to see. And we talked about this, and I don't remember exactly when it was. Dick Hawley brought something forward, and I think that was for the watershed. But to me, this committee should look at that, help the city as a whole draft those annual budgeting requirements, and focus. So when these other watershed districts or these other government bodies that deal with the water that affects our city and our residents, we have a more active role in that process. So to me, if that's not included here, I think we should add that in, that's part of what the charter would be for this committee.
Mr. Mayor, I think the committee's suggestion on the ordinances is very positive. For example, your planning commission is just starting to rewrite the shoreline ordinance, and we invited this committee to come to the planning commission meeting to see what's going on. The people in this committee are far more expert in water quality issues than anybody on the council and the planning commission, I think. And they're talking about things that I don't understand in the two meetings I was there. But I think it's a very positive, and they're not aiming anything. They just think there's some opportunities that the city could come in with some water quality ideas in the ordinances that might prolong the sustain viability of all your water bodies. So I don't think that's a witch hunt in any way. I think they're offering help.
Mr.
That's the way I see it.
With all due respect, I respect what you said, but we just went through the Waterford Landing ordeal in the sense that it took quite a lot to get that through, and there was a lot of consternation with the shoreline ordinance and so on, and I think that's where a lot of this is coming from. And I don't doubt that the Planning Commission needs to look at this, and this is a high priority. But to make that their number one focus, to me, that's a narrow focus. We're put together this group because we want to change ordinances. This should be a more far-reaching focus. And the ordinances, if they come up with good ideas on changing existing ordinances, improvements to those ordinances, they can bring them to us, to the council. And yeah, but I don't think that should be written into their focus is their number one goal.
I agree with Councilmember Vaught. And in fact, I think when this came up as an initial idea, the question I asked was, what problem are we trying to solve? And I don't think that's a problem, so to speak. I mean, we have 3 jurisdictions at this point in time that we must align with, and they actually supersede anything that we put in place from a code standpoint. We have to comply with the 3 districts and what they put in place from a state code perspective. So I agree to have that to be the number one priority. I think it's a misalignment, but I do see from a what I interpreted it to mean, or what this committee's intent was exactly that: advising the council on ways to improve water quality. Yes, we'll go through and we'll look at code and making sure code is aligned correctly, but to have that be the number one priority, I think that's the wrong.
Mr. Mayor, would also report that these were not in order.
Right, this is not a priority order.
It's not a priority list. There were 3 things that they had that I think they would feel that they were equal.
And I was going to ask that question if this was in order of priority, because I look at number 1 and kind of say that's the outcome, right? That's the result of studying problems, finding solutions, and then trying to codify them. But to Councilmember Crowley's point, we have 3 jurisdictions, but yet we still saw the things that happened and the interest that was generated around Schutz Lake with Waterford Landing, and even how it impacted the street reconstruction in Swiss Mountain across the road. Those are opportunities that, for a few vocal residents with a keen interest in it, would have been lost. We took advantage of those projects to make some improvements, and so I think this committee has a very valid role. But I kind of agree with Councilmember Vogt. It's step back and it's bigger. It's sort of strategic rather than tactical, and it should be to kind of figure out the big picture, and then behind that comes finding projects. And I also identify the Zumbra drainage issue. It's another one that kind of fell in everybody's crack. Everybody but nobody had ownership of it, and so this is kind of to bridge those gaps, I think.
So is this just simple wordsmithing here and say the committee shall be advisory to the city council in the following areas or in the following priorities, and it's bring emerging water quality, first and foremost, bring emerging water quality issues to the attention of the council. Second, recommend projects and prioritize. And third, where applicable, recommend improvements to the existing city code.
I'm fine with the changes. I would add 4th, help draft city input to the various water districts that we interact with.
I agree with that.
I agree too.
Addition.
Yes.
Do we also want to talk about them as a formal part of the planning process, reviewing any proposed developments that are, within a shoreland or a watered a conservation district?
I was going down that path too, and then now I'm thinking that we have a formal process for that. I think it's more along the lines of the Planning Commission in those instances should reach out to the water quality to seek their input as opposed to, I'm not sure I'm ready to, let's change the process and run it through both.
Yeah, I don't.
For a little while and then
Right.
decide.
Right.
All right, is there consensus on the council to make those changes? Add in the annual budgeting item, and then also revise number 1, as Councilmember Crowley suggested?
Sounds good to me.
Could you word the budgeting piece of it? That was the one that I was propose some language or.
I would suggest something along the lines of this committee review and provide draft input for the council to consider regarding the annual budgeting and priority process that each of the various conservation districts or watershed districts that we interact with that they go through. Now I'd have to write it all out to wordsmith it, but Doug, do you see the basic?
Yeah, as an example of that, I mean, we have this ongoing concern of having to dredge all of our stormwater ponds. I would expect this committee to be very involved in any discussions around that and the potential budgeting issues related to that and expressing those needs, concerns, requirements to those bodies.
I think that's implied, because it's just the whole.
I was just offering that as an example to help wordsmith it, whatever the words
Oh,
are.
gotcha.
That's an example of one that we would need their help on.
So, council, other questions, comments?
I would just say that to have a certain order, and the first is really the third one, as Councilmember Crowley mentioned, and the first is really the last one, or near the last.
So unless the council objects, I would suggest that we go forward and approve this with the noted exception that Doug will work with the committee to make the changes the council discussed tonight instead of tabling this and looking at another version in the next meeting. Council, any objections to that?
I agree. I think the changes are minor.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, let's do this. Let's go back a second. So first off, on the changes, I'll go ahead and call for the vote. All in favor of letting Doug make the changes signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Okay, Doug, so you've got that. Now let's have the motion up to approve this.
So my motion
was to allow Doug to make the changes.
So I was so moved to all of the above.
Okay.
So I think we've approved it.
If we need to.
Hey,
I
make
think
a motion to approve the resolution forming the Lake and Water Quality Advisory Committee.
Seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Okay, we did it twice then. Next item, appoint planning commission alternates.
Mayor?
I'm sorry?
You need to appoint
We need a motion to appoint these.
members of the advisory committee.
I move we appoint the members of the advisory committee as noted on this slide, given the alternating terms. Is that sufficient? Is there a second?
Before we second discussion, or you'll have a discussion.
We have a second discussion. Go ahead.
How are these members, I know quite a few of them, but how are these members selected and who selected them?
They generally volunteered. I think the mayor asked some of them. One was a friend of mine, and so we recruited as much as we could on every lake. We asked we went to the associations and anybody we could find, and some of these guys recommended people on the other lakes. So it was sort of word of mouth type.
Just as a reminder, we asked the Lake Association or HOAs, the case may be, to select their own representative for their lake. And then the council had 2 at-large members that were just somewhere in the city to look at other issues. So that's kind of the process we went through. Other questions?
Was there any dissent on that or any multiple competing candidates where there was any?
No, and as you see, we still have one lake that there's no representative on, but we were able to find somebody, Lance Fisher, I think, for example, served on one of the watersheds at one point, and he is the chairman elected by the body at this point.
Any other comments? Okay, we have a valid motion. All in favor of approving these individuals signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Hearing none, they're approved. Now, Cindy, did I get them all? Okay. Appoint Planning Commission alternates. Council, we need to appoint a first alternate and a second alternate. And just for clarity, if they show up and there's only one empty seat, the first alternate would fill that. If there's two empty seats, both alternates would fill. So we need to appoint a first alternate and a second alternate. I'd like to start with Councilmember Crowley. Of the list, could you tell me what your first choice is, or your choice for first alternate and your choice for second alternate, please?
Excuse me, Mr.
Yep.
Mayor?
Go ahead.
I think this is not the correct way to get a consensus because it leaves the advantage to the last person.
Okay. What would you suggest? That's fine.
I would suggest you have everyone put on a piece of paper their first two selections and hand them to the city manager and have the city manager give us a tally.
Works for me. You guys have them?
Yeah, Mayor and Council, you can do what you're doing, that's fine, but we'll have to identify each person's suggestion.
Write your name on it.
Yeah,
Put
just
your
write your
name
name
on it.
Put your name on it. Non-lawyer way of saying that, put your name on your paper.
Tom, and Jim.
Yeah, good luck with that one. Pass them down.
Sorry.
I assume you're putting them in order, first is first and second, second?
Yep.
Yes, sorry. You're going to get that from everybody, probably. Good call.
Yeah. Okay, so we got more.
We need a theme for Final Jeopardy.
Laura Moore, first. Cappy, second.
Is there a consensus there?
Probably is, we haven't gotten there yet, though.
And then Tom Moore.
Somebody found it.
And then second.
Thank you, Kara.
That wasn't me.
Maybe is adequate. First is Moore. Yeah. And Brownlee. And Mayor is Moore. And Brownlee. Yep.
All right.
Good luck with that.
Okay.
We have a winner.
We have.
We have a winner. Moore was picked as the first choice by everybody in the council. And second choice is a tie between Brownlee and Walter, each getting 2 votes. Yeah, and then the third vote went somewhere else.
So we should re-vote again for
For the second one?
So, Mayor and Council, this is not a vote. I think this is, you are using this to inform
Yeah.
the motion that
Right.
will be
You're
made.
going to make a motion, but
Yeah.
So I got it. So I move based on this that we appoint Laura Moore as the first alternate. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Okay, Laura Moore is the first alternate. Now for the second alternate, the two leading candidates were John Brownlee and Ann Wolter. Is that correct?
yes.
All right. So one more time, gentlemen.
Or should we just go down and state a name?
I'm fine with that. Go ahead.
I would choose Ann.
Ann.
John Brownlee.
And
There you have it. Go ahead.
Okay. Winner has it.
Need a motion.
I move that the second alternate is Ann Wolter. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Ann is the second alternate.
As a matter of record, should Councilmember Gregory have a name?
Oh, I thought he
Brownlee.
said it. Did he?
Yeah,
John Brownlee?
I'm
Okay.
sorry, I didn't hear.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, next item. Kelly. 6C.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. We have a request from the owner of the Creamery project to consider deferring some of the city charges associated with that project. We have done a similar deferral in the past, however, it was for a townhome project. So what staff has done is put together an agreement similar to the prior one, whereby the city would defer 75% of the water and sewer core fees for the project. The $20,475 would be due up front, and $61,425 would be deferred until either a temporary certificate of occupancy is issued or June 25th, 2019 arrives. So whichever of those would come first is when that would trigger that the payment would be due. The rationale for this is to assist the developer with the financing of the property. That way she could roll project costs into a final loan versus a construction loan. The city would be charging a 2% interest rate on this. That's close to what the city would be able to earn on the money if the city had received it up front. In the event that the fees were not paid, the property owner would agree to have the fees put on as a special assessment against the property. With that, there would be a $45 special assessment fee, and then interest at an annual rate of 5% would apply to that assessment. Bob did review this and had some recommended changes, so those were incorporated into the document you see. With that, I am happy to take any questions.
Council, comments, questions?
As part of this project, is there going to be any actual water or sewer work done between the building and the city utilities?
I would defer to Kara on that one.
Generally, no. Whether they might be relocating a sewer service within their property. It was quite some time ago when I reviewed the plans, but they aren't doing any work outside of their property.
I'm just, I'm in favor of this, but I'm shocked that, and core fees by their nature aren't to compensate or to repay anybody for anything or to cover any costs incurred by anyone. They're just, generally speaking, for new construction, they are to pay for that infrastructure being installed in the first place. But when it's already in place, I just am a little shocked to see almost an over almost $82,000 bill, and it just goes into the for future infrastructure needs kind of a fund.
The one that's a little bit easier to understand is the water core fees, because they will use additional water, and so we need to have enough storage, enough water treatment. And those types of things available and on demand when they need water. So
They're going to use more than a brewery?
Met Council does the SAC determination. I
Right,
gave up a long time ago to figure out how they figure out that math. But
And I think that's an absolutely fair question. And with a tap room, I would argue it's maybe not even that different in any respect. However, that's a whole ordinance question that we're not going to solve tonight, but I'm just kind of going on record as saying I support this, and I'm shocked to see how big the bill is for this.
Council, other comments, questions?
SAC units, when the Met Council does this, are we paying something to somebody, the city?
No, we don't pay them to make a determination.
No, I meant when they say we require an additional 21 additional SAC units, that doesn't put us on the hook to pay out some money to someone, does it?
There is a pass-through fee that goes to the Met Council. So the 21 SAC units are charged, I believe it's $2,485 per unit. So that will be collected at the time the building permit is issued, and that will be,
That's above and beyond.
that's
what
above
we're
and
seeing
beyond
on the
this.
screen here.
And that will be turned over to the Met Council.
Right, so that's also hitting this business person, right?
Yes.
That'd be helpful background.
So we're not able to waive that fee. That fee has to be paid at time of building permit, because we pay them.
Right, but the SAC unit thing, which is one of the basis of our water and sewer core, or is, I don't know what it's a basis of, but does it involve a cash outflow from the city?
We don't have to pay anything, even though we're deferring if we approve this.
No, it's a pass through.
But we don't have to pay anything in advance, is my point.
Right, that's the
that's
question.
being asked.
That's the question.
We don't have to cover it in the
We do not
interim
have to
until they
shell
pay
out.
for it. No money leaves anybody's hands until the money
Will
comes
we
from
be
them.
collecting money before we shell anything out?
Or simultaneously.
We're not going to pay the Met Council until the owner of this building pays this at the earlier of
No.
building permit or
No, we're getting off track here. There's two different things going on here. One, every time we connect to the sewer system, we pay per unit to the Met Council. That's regional money for the regional pipes. Okay, that we can't waive, and that they're going to pay. It's about $50,000 she has to pay at time of building permit. We pass through.
We're going to pass that right.
We pass that right through to Met Council.
Right.
She gives, the second part is local that you take for your trunk system, sewer and water. Those are the two you're waiving for a short time with interest.
and that only comes to us. We don't pass that through.
Comes right to us.
Thank you.
We're waiving it. We get the interest for, up to a year, we waive it, so we get the same as we would as if we had in our bank account.
Because we had it would go into our reserve.
That's correct.
And
And that's the kind of money you used when you talked earlier in the workshop about building new pipes.
When do they plan on opening?
It's going to be January.
I do not know.
Last I heard was something like year end or.
Yeah, probably closer to January. That's what I've heard.
They've not taken out their building permit yet. I think they're doing a little bit of, but.
All right. Any other comments, questions? If not,
This is an exciting project, and it's going to be a substantial build-out, and I mean, the tax revenue from this project is going to be substantial. So this is, I'm all in favor of this.
good. I move we approve the agreement regarding deferral of city charges with Mary Mavison for the Creamery project. Is there a second?
second.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Doug, next item, 6D, ordinance revising city manager authority and duties.
I only gave you one slide, Doug.
Oh,
So I don't know what else you need, but I can pull up any of the items.
Mr. Mayor, this ordinance is in reaction to some discussion that the mayor has brought forth and the council has talked somewhat of the duties of the city manager. In 2012, when the city voted to convert to the city manager plan, you passed an ordinance amending your city ordinances to bring in that plan. What we find now is that while you were operating on a pure city manager plan, some of the language that we adopted at that point was not right on target, and so there was a variance between what was still written in the ordinance and what the practice had been for the city. So the purpose of this ordinance is to bring the city manager form of government into the pure form that it should have been. There's some, I don't think it will change the operation of the city. It simply documents of how we are operating today and how we should operate under the pure city manager form of government.
Doug, in the absence of this update, is there state statute that says we're Plan B, we do this?
That's what the ordinance is based on. Maybe I'll let the city attorney to say more.
Sure, yeah. So Mayor and Council, we've talked about this a little bit at prior meetings. And the short answer to your question, Council Member, is yes. So in Minnesota, fundamentally two kinds of cities: charter cities that have their own. I'll use the wrong word.
Excuse me just a second. Can you bring up the staff report? Sorry, Bob, go ahead.
Charter cities that operate under what I would call loosely a constitution, a individual city driven set of rules that guide the way the city operates and guides the way the city adopts ordinances. The other kind, the more common kind in Minnesota, is a statutory city. Statutory cities come in different flavors, different types, called optional plans. And you are, by virtue of a referendum in 2012, an optional Plan B city council manager plan. And each of the plans, Plan B and the other kinds of city councils that we can have statutory provisions about how those cities will operate. The statutory provisions aren't comprehensive. They don't say everything that might be said about the way those kinds of cities operate, but they say a fair amount about the way those cities operate. So there is a section in state law that deals with optional Plan B city manager form of government and sets out many of the things that are addressed by this code language that's in front of you now.
Thank you. So where I'm going with this is in the past, whatever the time I've been here, occasionally where we've had ordinances that ran completely parallel or were completely redundant with a county or a state ordinance, we've simply abandoned the city version and followed that, and it eliminates, and I guess, you look at this and you can say, we were operating properly, and so this is an important technicality to get it cleaned up, but if we had simply said we're going to switch to the state statute Plan B, would there have been any difference? And should we just get rid of this altogether and say, see state statute?
Yeah, well, Mayor and Council, maybe I can say it my way. Would it be possible for a city, Plan A, Plan B, city to simply say in its code, we are a Plan B city and we're going to operate under, cite the statutory sections? Yes, that's a theoretical possibility. I guess I've not come across cities that have done it that way, but I don't know why a city couldn't, in its code, simply say, this is what we are, and we're going to operate in conformance with applicable state laws. I think cities don't do that typically because you would leave out some topics that are typically addressed in a city code about, particular procedural or governance issues that are just not covered by the statute. But yes, the city could do that if you wanted to do that. I guess I'm not going to encourage you to do that. I wouldn't recommend that you do that for the reason I just said. I think you'd leave out some topics that you might want to address. But yes, is the short answer.
Thank you. And that's the advice expertise that I was interested in. And can you elaborate? I know this is probably a little unfair because I didn't kind of preview this with you, but are there differences? Where does our ordinance go that the state statute does not?
Yeah.
This time.
Well, Mayor, council member, what topics do you touch on that statute doesn't address? I guess I'd have to think about that. I mean, the easy way, let me answer the question that's easier for me to answer than the one you asked. The area where the proposed changes to your code interpret or take from statutes what is implied but not said explicitly is really all in section 2-150, which is titled in your code Authority and Duties. There are some provisions there that I'm proposing, that Doug is proposing to amend, and I've helped him do it, that literally come right out of the statute. But there are a couple of provisions there that are understandings about what city managers typically do. Everything else that's proposed to be amended here really tracks very, very closely with statutory language. So it's really...
Is there a League of Cities model that we work with too, or not? I don't know.
There is not a model that I'm aware of. I didn't refer to it if there is one, so I'm not aware of one. So, Councilmember, to your point, I think primarily it's in that section 2-1. Am I reading that right? I don't have my glasses on. I apologize. 159. I said 150. 2-159 starts on page 3 of the memo. That's really the area where some of the things addressed there, some of the topics addressed there, are not explicitly addressed in state law. I guess if you want me to go further than that, as an example, provision 8, subprovision 8 of section 2-159 That language, we've proposed to delete some language there and add some language there. The language there is literally verbatim or virtually verbatim from state law. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, the language in the preceding provision 7, we propose to add language. This is about budgeting and about fiscal matters. The city manager shall keep the council fully advised as to the financial condition and needs of the city and shall prepare and submit to this council the annual proposed budget. That language is not verbatim from state law. That topic is addressed in statute. The topic of the manager working on the budget and presenting a budget is addressed, is required by state law. But the way that's said there is not verbatim from state law. So I could go on and on with examples like that, but it's this section of amendments that we have not literally gone verbatim from statute.
Okay, thank you. And we can, from my perspective, we can stop there. I just was looking for ways to avoid this kind of administrative, oversight from recurring, minimizing, the workload. So sounds like there's legitimate reasons to just press on as is.
Council, additional comments, questions?
Yes, Mayor, if I could. Just from Mr. Vos, from your memo, just to kind of track that. I don't know if you have that right. Just on page 2, section 2.4, interference with administration. Middle of the paragraph, it says, council may not interfere with the city manager in any manner nor. Is that overly restrictive? I mean, when I read that, I thought, boy, if I publicly disagree or with the city manager, am I overstepping my bounds?
Well, Mayor and Council, so that's an example of the inverse of what I was just talking about. That's a change that's literally meant to track verbatim from state law. So you see the state law reference that you see below this provision, you see it below some of the other provisions in your city code, that's in your existing city code. Your existing city code has those state law reference notes in your code, and it notes 412.661. I brought, because I figured I'd get asked these questions, I brought the statutory provisions, and so 412.661 is titled in state law, Limit on Council Powers, that's the title, and then the first sentence of that is, neither the council nor any of its members shall dictate the appointment of any person to office or employment by the manager, comma, or in any manner, that's the language added there, interfere with the manager or prevent the manager from exercising judgment in the appointment of officers and employees in the administrative service, and it goes on. So that's an example of a change that's simply meant to track verbatim with the statute.
Okay, but you don't see that as overly restrictive?
Well, Mayor and Council, I guess that's I'm not
subject to. Okay.
That's a policy determination that the legislature has made. So,
and then on page 3, any particular reason why the council shall be defined as 4 council members and the mayor? I mean, it seems pretty benign, and I mean, the mayor is separate from in some duties. I mean, isn't that appropriate?
That's true. Yeah, Mayor and Council, the reason for that is unnecessary because you have, as most city codes do, you've got a beginning section with definitions in it, definitions that would apply throughout the code, and there is a definition for city council.
Okay, well, that's fine. And then from your memo, page 5. Here you did deviate a little bit from state statute in the middle of the manager may not approve an expenditure that is that prior to that. We'll start at the beginning of the bold. It said, all city purchases and contracts shall be made or let by the manager when the amount of the purchase or contract does not exceed $20,000. That was verbatim, I believe, or very close to it, unless the lower limit is established by the council resolution. That's a little different. That's okay. But here you did deviate. You said, provided that all claims resulting therefrom shall be presented to and audited by the council. And again, I brought this up a few weeks ago. From state statute, it says, but all claims resulting therefrom shall be audited and approved by council. Any objection to putting in approved by council?
No. No, I mean, to the extent you want to go verbatim from that provision, apparently you've looked at that provision. You and I have talked about what I understand that to mean, that I understand that to mean an after-the-fact auditing function. And I suppose by adding that language, you may just reopen that debate down the road, but I certainly can't object to wanting to follow the statute.
Okay. I'd prefer to put that in. And then you struck the language underneath, all expenditures shall be made in compliance with the requirements of state and city purchasing policies and procedures. Any particular reason why you'd strike that?
Yeah, Mayor and Council, no. No, other than I think that's just sort of, when I draft code language, try not to say things that are self-evident or are just required. It is true that cities and representatives, agents of cities have to spend money or take any actions in accordance with state law and with the purchasing policy. So, but no, if council felt compelled to keep that, no, that's not problematic for my.
Again, personally, I'd like to keep it in, and I don't know how council feels about that.
I move we change this section of the language in this particular piece to reflect the language that's in the statute. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Discussion.
Discussion is, Mr. Vos, what is the legislature saying when they say presented to and audited and approved by the council? Presented to and audited and approved by the council. The council is approving the results of their audit?
Yeah, so Mayor and Council, obviously we've talked about this topic a number of times previously in relation to the open meeting law expenditures, which are on the back of everyone's mind. I've given you a memo that analyzes that statutory language about the audit and approve, and that essentially is the conclusion is that the fundamental duty of the council where the manager makes an expenditure that he's authorized to make, he or she is authorized to make, the council's job is to after the fact audit that, and then of course you have to, in doing that, approve your review of that expenditure. So that's again a lawyer way of saying yes to your question. Yes,
so
that's my.
It means that the council will review and then approve their review. It doesn't say that the council is approving or disapproving of the original decision by the city manager.
Mayor and Council, just to make it really simple, it is my understanding that it would not make sense, would not have made sense for the legislature to say to cities, when the manager spends money, you must both first approve the expenditure and then after the fact audit that expenditure. That just doesn't make sense. So what you're saying is right. Managers clearly have expenditure authority. State law says that. And state law says when managers exercise that, the council needs to audit that expenditure. So that's my understanding of state law.
Other questions?
So that, sorry, just
go ahead.
Maybe try and paraphrase it another way. We're not approving a particular expense, but whether or not the expense was consistent with policy and statute.
Yes, Mayor and Council, that's right. And the reason for that, I'm going to go beyond the things that are in front of you here tonight, but I mean, just to get to the guts of that. The reason for that is the practice is now, and has always been, as far as I know, that city councils, when they adopt budgets, will have a number of budgetary items that are unrestricted or uncommitted funds from which a representative could spend money. And so the idea that a representative would only spend budgeted monies really doesn't get the public very far. It's not much of a cap or a limit on that expenditure authority, and so the legislature wanted cities to take a look at all expenditures made, even where an individual in the city has the power to make the expenditure. The council needs to audit that and review that after the fact.
I mean, for me, the absolute ability for us to know that money is being spent appropriately is it's paramount. That is one of the most important duties we have up here. What I want to avoid, though, is a gotcha situation. You know, you've got in any given claims roster hundreds of line items of individual expenses, and you know, I think most of us probably scan them at some level, but don't, you know, go in and dig into the details of every expense, and don't want to find ourselves in a position where we're approving something, in a way that puts you in some sort of uncomfortable position legally.
Okay, we have a valid motion on the floor to change this to reflect the language in the statute. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor of making the change signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Hearing none, that motion passes. I also move that the line, all expenditures shall be made in compliance with the requirements of the state and city's purchasing policies and procedures, not be struck and be left, since the city does have a purchasing policy in place that limits the city manager's authority to $10,000 instead of the 20. Is there a second?
Second that.
Discussion?
Is that redundant with just a couple sentences above that? I guess that's the only thing
I would rather see it explicit, which is why I made the motion. Further discussion?
Yeah, I guess try to avoid duplicate language in contracts. And to me, this seems to be a duplicate, exactly as Councilmember Striegel stated, of what's up above and right in the first sentence. And so then you get into a discussion of, well, subtle nuances, they're worded a little bit differently. What did that sentence mean versus the first sentence? The first sentence says it all. So no, I don't think it's needed.
Further discussion? We have a valid motion to reinsert that line. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed signify by saying nay.
No.
That motion does not pass. You got it? Okay.
Mr. Mayor?
Go ahead.
Madam City Clerk, I went down the avenue of talking about the specific item on the approval of the council when we were discussing whether the council approved the specific, where's it? I'm trying to find it. The discussion I brought up, is that going to get into the record? No, when I first brought up to Mr. Vos on his explanation.
I've got it down and summarized usually. I put the points in.
Okay.
All right, can we get the motion up for the ordinance? I move we adopt ordinance amending Chapter 2 of the Victoria City Code regarding city council manager form of government. Is there a second?
With related changes?
I'm sorry, with related changes. Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye. 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 All opposed? Hearing none, passed unanimously. With the changes that passed. Okay. Doug, was that all on this one?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Next, unfinished business. Councilmember Striegel, you brought this up. Why don't you start?
Thanks. Just as a kind of refresher on this, there was an article in the Chanhassen Villager at the end of May. The mayor expressed some concerns and some positions and some activities that I think were unbeknownst to most, if not all, of the council, and raised a number of concerns. And one particular citizen wrote a letter, and I think he did a good job of encapsulating the questions. So I just, at the last meeting, I asked that we go through that, and we deferred it to make sure it was an official agenda item. So I guess I'd just like to ask the mayor, just to go down the list. I think there's one or two of the questions that we can move through as we get to them. But so first one is, have you published the names? And this is relevant to reviewing ordinances and pay and a number of different aspects of the city code and the city operations. So have you published the names of the, quote, team of residents who did the review?
No.
How did you decide who was on the team?
People that want to improve the city operations. They volunteered.
Did the other council members have input into the team makeup?
Nope.
What city offices and materials were used?
None. I asked Doug a couple of questions and went to the website, used the policy book I was given. It's all publicly available data.
The next one was, did these people get information that's confidential and not normally available? I think that was no, and this is, as you said, public information, so I'm fine with that one. Concerning salaries, why are you making the judgments on previous salaries as you are only one person and have only one vote for the future?
Well, that's I didn't make any judgment. That's your words. I simply was pointing out that the ordinance requires the council to review and approve salaries, and that wasn't being done.
Well, and I think, first of all, just let me reiterate, I'm reading a letter from a concerned resident, but from what I hear, he's certainly not alone. And he goes on in terms of background to state that the reason for his questions are that it appears that you are on a vendetta to find things you don't like about the past instead of looking to the future. Because of this vendetta, we have lost excellent employees and have seen the city come to a standstill as you go after previous administration. And he asks that you please consider the damage you're doing to Victoria with this vindictive behavior. And feel free to comment on that.
Yeah, well, he's entitled to his opinion. I have a different opinion.
And I guess, I did also, this dialogue between you and the city manager about salaries began, a couple of months ago. And so I was surprised when I, saw the data and what it showed, that it would still show that, the premise of it was that Victoria overpays its city staff.
No, I never said that.
I beg to differ, but we'll move on. So having said that, it's in writing, and it's clear that that's not the case, but yet the way it was published certainly casts a negative light on everyone. And I understand it's not even the end of your second year as mayor, but I think you understand that as a Plan B city, that the council is responsible for one salary and one only, and the hiring, and that is the city manager. We approve budget, and the city manager then appropriates that for merit increases, et cetera, as appropriate. And of course, as mayor, you've been on the finance committee, so you've approved all of these things for the last 18 months, and it comes out in the paper as though you're surprised by what you found. And so I guess I'll just reiterate and echo this resident's concern that it seems out of place and inappropriate. And frankly, it's a little embarrassing for you to be so publicly wrong to make these assertions and state things that you should know clearly otherwise as you perform your duties. And I guess I'd ask that in the future, out of courtesy to the city staff, the experts, the people that we pay to do this work, that conversation take place amongst the council and the staff, and not show up in the newspaper as our first indication.
Well, I disagree with a lot of what you said. I'm getting different data from other sources other than with the city staff. I haven't been able to track down which set is the accurate data. And so when I have time, I'll be able to go ahead and do that. But the bottom line is this. People can have differences of opinions. I wrote that to point out the fact that the ordinance requires this council to review and approve. I didn't think that's done. I stand by what I wrote, and I'm going to continue to write articles when I find things that I think as part of transparency that I need to make the public aware of.
But despite the data that was presented by the city manager that demonstrates the assertions made in the article were wrong, and you're saying you have different data? Is that what you're saying?
I'm not.
You heard from somebody.
No, I actually have data that was given to me by other mayors in Carver County. And that data is different than what the interim city manager gave me. So I don't know which set of data is right, but that doesn't matter, and that's not the point. The point is this was all about the ordinance requires the city council to review and approve, and I don't think that had been done. Furthermore, on the parking, you know, you don't have to agree with me, and that's fine if you don't, and neither does the gentleman who wrote the letter. I stand by what I wrote. You claim that I'm wrong, but yet, Doug, didn't we just send a letter telling the one developer that he needs to complete a parking study?
Yes, I don't know what that has to do with.
So the point is in that paper is these parking studies hadn't been done, and my point is I thought they should be done.
That's not true. That
Different situation.
That's not true that they weren't done.
Okay, well, we can agree to disagree then, because I do agree. I believe it should have been done,
Can we
and
have
hence.
Mr. Vogt finish his statement, please?
Go ahead, Councilmember.
I
Vogt.
remember a study being done for the city when the city hall was built. There was a study which included the property over by the post office and the city hall and the creamery, and that was done by an outside source, and it was updated when the Main Street building was built by that same outside source. So that's two. There was a study done with Victoria Flats.
That's not part of the CBD. That's residential.
Well, but it's a big parking issue. It affects parking in the central business district. It very much affects it, and there was a thorough study done of that, and it was discussed at length and promulgated to everyone on the face of this planet almost. So, and I can go on. There were others. There may have been some omissions, but to paint the picture that nobody was paying attention to parking, that there was no discipline, that there were no numbers cranked, there was no discussion, there was no decisions, and that the councils were oblivious to it and the mayors were oblivious is an incorrect picture, and it's downright misleading. It goes with the fact that in the same article you made this allegation about salaries, and basically all the city salaries are behind everybody else in Carver County. So you failed to mention that. You just question that they got 2 or 3% increases while the rest of the world wasn't getting any, and that's not true either. So you're painting a picture here, Mr. Mayor, and the picture always goes in one direction. There's malfeasance at City Hall. We were operating by the seat of our pants. There's no internal control. This is the picture you're painting. You mix facts with fallacy. It's a common methodology when you're trying to mislead people.
Doug, when I asked you for the copies of the parking studies, what did you tell me?
You asked me for studies that were done by an outside engineers, and what I told you was that under the ordinance, you are not required to do a study for each parking thing unless you are not able to meet the ordinance requirements.
And didn't you also tell me when we discussed this?
I did not tell you about these studies that they're talking about because I didn't know about, but now I know that there were 2 or 3 studies done, one by staff and 2 or 3 outside consultants. Westwood did a couple of them, so there have been some done.
So
whether each specific one building that was built in downtown had a study, I don't think so because the ordinance did not require that, and that's what I told you.
So when I was asking you about this and you told me no studies had been done, now tonight for the first time I'm hearing studies do exist. Furthermore, when you and I met, didn't you also tell me that the ordinance could be interpreted the way that I was, and that is in order to get a 50% reduction in the central business district, which is what the shared parking ordinance applies to, you would have to do a study to justify the reduction. Isn't that what you told me in the meeting when we met on this?
What I told you this week when we met was that the ordinance as we now have it, I think, and the rest of the planning consultant staff thinks, is not very clear. This council and the last council and the council before that and the last 2 community development directors have all interpreted the current ordinance to say that in the downtown area, if you build a new building or greatly modify a building, that you are required to abide by the parking ordinance, except that you can vary by as much as, the language says, as much as 50%. The consistent interpretation of that ordinance for the last 2 councils, at least the last 8 years, has been that you do get a 50% reduction if you're in the downtown area. And the interpretation was that if you do meet the 50% requirement, you are not then required to do a shared parking study. Only under that interpretation were you required to do a shared parking study for a building as the Creamery did if you could not meet at least the 50% requirement. Now, what I told you about the interpretation of the ordinance was that part of our staff would go with you on the fact that another interpretation of the language was, and possibly the original intent was, that if you're in the downtown area, you had to provide 100% of the parking unless you could show that shared parking in other areas off your property or off your property could provide up to 50% of the required. So if that is the interpretation, then in order to demonstrate the shared parking, you have to do a shared parking study by a professional engineer. That's what we told you. That's not the interpretation that any council has ever made here. And it is an interpretation you made. I'm saying there's some staff thought, looking at other cities, the city of Chaska automatically gives a 75% reduction in the downtown area, and other cities, do similars. It's based on studies that have been done around the country. So if the council wants to go into your theory, Mayor, they would have to rewrite the ordinance and reinterpret the way we've been doing. It's totally different from what you've been doing. And I think what this council would need to do either way is to say, do we want to follow what we've been doing up to 50% automatically, or go your way where you have to do a shared study? And the council should tell the staff which way you want to go on that, and then we would correct this ordinance and make it a little bit more specific of exactly the way it should go.
So let's add that to our agenda and remove the ambiguity. I stand by what I wrote. I think this is the reason we have no money in the shared parking fund for the last 10 years. I think it should be required in order to get the 50% reduction, and that's the way I interpreted it. So I stand by what I wrote.
Doug, just to clarify for the record, the mayor repeated your statement that there was no parking studies. The memo that you sent to the council on the 11th says that you don't have the history of every building in the CBD. In other words, you were unclear. What was it?
Clearly, and I've learned a lot more since I responded originally, because I keep running into finding new things and trying to find staff. You don't have a staff with a long history because they're gone. So we've been finding more and more of studies information, and I have 2 studies in my hand here that I didn't know existed when I wrote the original thing. So there's been more studies done than I was aware of at that time when I originally talked to the mayor, for sure.
Additional comments?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor,
Go ahead.
Just to be clear now on the Creamery, they did need extra parking and they did need a conditional use. And were they required to do a parking study? An outside source?
Staff, my understanding was staff did the parking study.
But it wasn't by an outside source?
That is correct, but
under the ordinance, that should have been, right?
That is correct.
Okay. And then just because of the mayor's column, you also looked at a number of other things. The value per parking stall in 2008 was $5,000. I think that I think that's how that was interpreted. And then
the land value was like $1,500, and the construction, it was $3,500, total of $5,000.
Right, so total of $5,000. But then looking closer at that ordinance, you realize that number should have been reevaluated every year since then.
It should be evaluated every year. That's
so
correct.
It could be $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, $10,000 per share.
Yes.
Per spouse. So that in that respect, that was good that we're looking at that. And then also, with respect to the redevelopment of the grocery store, we also looked closer at that, and now we're thinking that maybe they're anywhere from 19 to 24 spaces short because of looking closer at it.
I'd like to give you a total update on the grocery store.
Okay, great.
If I could, in your comment, to bring you up to date on that one.
Sure.
All right, council, any other comments on this? Okay, Doug, report to city manager. Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, we've been talking to Mr. Wortman, who's working on transforming the grocery store building into a activity center, axe throwing, bowling, miniature golf type of food supply thing and entertainment. In working with Mr. Wortman, what we've determined is that in agreement with him, he's going to submit a new document which shows that he will have a total of 72 spaces, which is what is required at the 50% level. That 72, the way he will get up to that 72 is by restriping the parking lot is now and making the spaces a little bit smaller, which is legal. He had made them oversized because they were grocery and people like a little bit more room. He has a couple doorways that were not striped for parking. He's going to remove a dumpster in the back that will provide a couple spaces. There's some extra parking in the back that he can. So we staff thinks that he can come up with 72 spaces. The only problem he has is that 15 of those spaces are on property that he has leased to Terry Hartman, so that those 15 spaces, when Mr. Hartman built the expansion of his building, those were required by the Planning Commission. He was required to lease 15 spaces to make his project viable. So staff is telling Mr. Wortman that he can't count it for his project because Hartman is catching it for his. So you can't do both things unless what we've agreed with Mr. Wortman now is that he is going to apply for a conditional use permit and go through a shared parking study. It may well be that those 15 spaces can be used for both projects because he's saying that my project's going to open basically at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Some of the other retail spaces there are not heavily parked at that time. So if the agreement we have with Mr. Wortman is that he will do that study and submit it to the city. If he gets enough parking spaces, that's the end of it. We will issue the building permit. I want to talk more about that. If he does not, he has agreed that he will pay for the spaces similar to what the creamery did at a current rate of whatever that value is. We'll do a new study. So that's where we're at on that. Now, on the building permit, we haven't issued a building permit for that project because he has not gotten certification from the Met Council about the SAC units. We always require SAC units to be paid at the time of building permit to make sure we get the money in because we have to give it to Met Council right away. So we are holding the building permit until he gets that. He only submitted his report to the Met Council a week ago. He thinks he will have an answer to that by the 13th because we have the 4th of July holiday in the middle. So once he does get his SAC unit, everything else for his building permit is ready to go and acceptable to staff. We will then issue the building permit. And I'm telling you, we're going to issue the building permit before we finish work on the conditional use permit. Conditional use permit will go to the Planning Commission on the 17th. I do have the application. It came in today. It will go to the Planning Commission on the 17th and to the Council on the 23rd. When's your meeting? And the end of July, 23rd, I think. So then he would have everything that he needs to do the project. I'm willing to give the building permit because no matter what happens with the conditional use permit process, he can build the project. Either he pays for extra spaces that he can't produce or the study shows that he has shared parking. So one way or the other, he will meet the parking requirement under the consideration that the council has done up to this date. Is that any questions on that? It's not simple, but I think the project is good, and I think it will be a benefit to the city, and I think he has come up with enough ways to provide the parking, and or if he doesn't, he's going to pay.
All right, thanks, Doug. Anything else?
I do have one other thing, Mr. Mayor. I've been asked by the staff to read this memo, and I'm the staff representative in this case. We have a lot of staff that are concerned about this issue. At the City Council meeting on June 11th, during the discussion of the 2017 audit, there came a motion by the mayor to revoke Kelly Grinnell's ability to sign checks stating the reason for separation of duties. Things to note of concern: using her name instead of her title. Secondly, the normal role of the finance director is to sign checks. Thirdly, separation of duties has already been obtained by having the account tech enter into all claims and the finance director overseeing the sign of checks. They also have a third-party participation in reconciling bank statements, so there is a clear separation of duties in place. Words from the co-workers: Kelly is a person of honesty and integrity, and she has always conducted herself in a business-like manner. The insinuation by the mayor is made that she is maybe doing something wrong. That goes against many of us that work with her. To see her call out in that manner is offensive. Many of us are wondering if we will be the next target. The personnel policy states we are expected to perform our duties satisfactorily and act in an appropriate business-like manner at all times. Helpful, efficient, and courteous service is the expectation of employees when serving the residents of Victoria and the public. Our desire for this council is to realize that we, as city employees, take pride in our work and hold ourselves in high standard. We'd like you to know that we will do the work that is sent our way, and we'd like to know that we have the support of you, our council. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else?
No.
Bob?
Mayor, I do have one thing to report. At your last meeting, I believe it was your last meeting, you held a public hearing on the assessment roll for the Steger Lake Lane improvements. During that hearing, you had some comments, some concerns from landowners that would be assessed. You received one set of written objections from one landowner. That landowner has now properly appealed the assessments of that property, and so that's a lawsuit against the city. The league does not cover that kind of litigation. Cities are not covered by the league for special assessment cases. So my office will be proceeding with defending that case, and we may at some point have closed session discussion about that. I don't need to talk to you tonight about it, but need to make you aware of that.
Thank you.
That's all I have.
Councilmember Crowley?
Doug, thank you for reading that letter from staff, and I'm disappointed that staff had to be placed in a position to write that, but I also applaud staff for speaking their minds. Thank you.
Councilmember Striegel?
There were a couple other, thank you, a couple other exhibits that really kind of, they're listed together under the unfinished business number 7, but they kind of speak to a broader topic, so I thought I'd just leave them. And they also, I think, interweave with the citizen survey. Traditionally, I think in the past when we've done surveys or with some semi-regular, maybe semi-annual timing, have held strategic planning sessions, and the citizen survey is a really key input to that. And so I guess I'd like to see this be more than just a footnote in passing in a visitor presentation of the council. I'd like to see some action taken. I think there should be a workshop or something to decide where and how we move forward with what we've learned from that. And I guess with the consent of the council, or have some discussion about what to direct the city staff to put together as a kind of the outline for that session. So that's one thing. And of course, the number one concern that was cited by the residents had to do with us, the council, and their lack of confidence and trust. And I think, when you look at things like the record of donations, and again, this is one of the exhibits that was attached to number 7, and how they've dramatically fallen off since 2016. I think that speaks to the level of engagement and citizens wanting to be, going above and beyond just paying their taxes, but actually actively contributing to it. So, that should worry everybody. And again, it speaks in my mind to, leading up to and including 2016, a community that valued itself and its culture, and is now just backing away from that. And we have to change that. That's absolutely critical in my mind. And again, as we talk about a strategic planning session, I think that's what do we do? Look at that chart and say, what do we do to change that? Some of the other things that, again, were implied by the mayor's letter in terms of personnel expense and talking about, it's spending too much money, it's out of control, we need to examine every line item and make it go away, or make it, make sure it's appropriate, is, of course, the charge that we have day in and day out, month in and month out, and always have. And I think if you take a look at some other charts, the staffing and TIF comparisons, the top one, you're looking at full-time equivalents, so basically head count for the city of Victoria, and how that's distributed. And that in and of itself, without kind of an understanding of what they do and how much they have to take care of and how many residents, some relative size thing, isn't a super meaningful number. But if you scroll down to the next one, which, and thank you to the staff for pulling this information together, shows that when you look at the number of employees that the city of Victoria has relative to the residents that we have, that we are the leanest, most economical in terms of the fewest number of employees per 1,000 residents at 2.7. Granted, a couple are close to us, but nobody in this group of our neighbors, and I picked the cities I thought were just closest to us, either in geography and or size. Nobody's lower. And so, again, I think these public assertions of, overspending and excess headcount and this impression that's being left is, it's just wrong. And I personally like to see, and I think you owe it to the staff to make a public retraction. There's also some additional information in here in terms of TIF districts, but that's probably a bigger discussion for a future time. So I'll just know that those are in the record if anybody's interested in looking at them. And then there's some additional data that goes behind that as well.
Councilor Striegel, if you don't mind, that TIF slide is the best I've ever seen. That one you haven't shown, I'd appreciate it if you could show it.
So the basis for my question, and I'll be honest, I think, Tom, Councilmember Vogt, sorry, that
Tom doesn't get it.
Tom V, yeah, thank you. You may be better able to sort of concisely summarize this, but let me just give the premise of what I was looking for. And that is that anytime there is a project proposed that TIF is part of the proposal, and it's a little bit complex subject, but basically what it means is some amount of the new taxes that are created by the project stay in the city. And on one hand, I kind of look at it and I say, well, this is our way of not rewarding a developer for taking a risk with a gigantic tax bill. An inherent part of TIF is that if it weren't for this relief from additional taxes, not existing, but additional taxes due to their investment, if not for that relief, the project wouldn't happen. So we're talking about money that only exists if TIF is part of the package. And that, is certainly a project or a program that can be abused. And so I think we as a council have used it pretty sparingly. And when we have used it, we do think about the majority of that money is money that would otherwise go into the school district and or the county for roads. And so you look at the project and the impact it would have on those. And so if you think about, for example, the Main Street building, it's purely retail, which I think everybody wanted. And so its impact in the school district is zero. I suppose you could make some arguments about traffic. Small boutique shops, probably not significantly measurable. And so that TIF money was used to create the parking, right? So did it go into the central parking fund? No, it went directly into creating the parking lot, improving the parking lot, making it easy for those merchants to attract customers, or easier. But to me, it was also, there's been some kind of demonizing, I'll say, about TIF. And I think if you, like I and probably most of us, didn't know very much about it until getting involved and needing to learn a little bit about it. But what I think about is, if we're the only ones who don't use it, and we're not, which is one of the things I learned here, but if we're the only ones who don't use it, what it ends up meaning is our residents' taxes are higher to subsidize projects in our neighboring cities that, in the county and in the school district, that do use TIF, because they're pulling money out. The budget for those organizations doesn't change. So Victoria residents are the ones who have to put it in. So taking an overall approach of no TIF is unilateral disarmament at the expense of the city's residents, and it's a lost opportunity. And again, you don't know what you're going to find. I asked the question. There's the data. But Tom, maybe if you want to comment on it further.
There's a couple of things that struck me. First of all, Victoria is, compared to some of our neighbors, doesn't use TIF much at all. Certainly, Chanhassen and Chaska put us to shame as far as use of TIF. And we're having to compete with those cities because that TIF buys them amenities, and it buys them jobs, it buys all kinds of things. And then we're at a disadvantage, and so we've got to compete with that. The other thing is, it's a small, of all the TIF transactions in the area, we're about 10%, and the amount of tax capacity that is out there is about $250,000 out of our total levy of $14 million, which is fly poop on pepper, if you don't mind saying. So basically, if you look at the downtown area here, since 2000, and I'm not sure when we started using TIF, it was late 90s, early 2000, correct me?
Late 90s.
Late 90s. The whole downtown area, if you remember what it looked like in the year 2000 and what it looks like today, all the amenities that are down here, the parking lots that nobody seems to know where they are, but they're here, including the one across the street, the lights, the curb and gutter, the brickwork that now we're thinking of redoing. How did it get here in the first place? All the amenities came from TIF. That's how we built this downtown. The parking, everything came from TIF. And it had virtually no impact on our taxpayers because there's a thing called but-for, that if we wouldn't have had the TIF, nothing would have happened. Nothing would have happened. And nobody's out anything. So TIF is a good thing. It's meant for cities our size. Our sister cities that are a lot bigger than us are using it a heck of a lot more to their advantage. So TIF has been maligned by certain people. And it's not true. It's a misunderstanding of TIF. So that's what this thing shows, is that we really can leverage when we use TIF. And it's meant for cities like us. We don't probably use it enough.
I think so. And just one other, I guess, addition to that, and that is that it's what built the downtown was a combination of TIF and building property owners' property taxes, which if you were to compare them to, property of a similar value the tax density of downtown is so much higher, the amount of money that those building owners, those risk takers who put their money into Victoria paid. And I think there were some numbers, and I don't want to get this wrong, so I won't say in detail, but there's something in the neighborhood of $3 million worth of downtown infrastructure improvements that were paid for by the building owners and TIF money that eliminated that burden, assuming that the residents want a downtown, and I think that's been widely stated as a goal. $3 million of infrastructure that did not come from general fund. It came directly from the property taxes paid by the building owners and TIF money, which again is just another rerouting of property taxes.
Councilmember Vogt, report.
Nothing more to say.
Councilmember Gregory.
No report.
I just have one comment. I never said, nor did I mean to imply that Kelly Grinnell was dishonest. I simply was referring to the auditor who said it would be better and make improvements if the signature authority of the finance director was removed. That's why I made the motion. If you go back to the tape, I think you'll see that. That's it.
But why did we make the motion that night where later on that night something was brought up that, oh no, we have to wait till the next meeting to put it on the agenda so that everybody has an ability to review it? We should have done the same thing for that.
It was part of the auditor's report, and when the auditor said that, I made the motion based on the auditor's comments.
I think I made my point.
Is the auditor's report makes the recommendation to take away the city manager or the city's finance director's signature authority?
If you remember, I asked that specific question, and he said, and I paraphrasing, yes, it would improve things.
But he didn't. That wasn't a part of the audit. That was just a topic that you chose to pursue, correct?
No, he said he didn't.
Mentioned anywhere in the written report?
No, and that's the other question I brought up is why don't you verify the controls? And he said they don't do that, which means we get a report, he verifies the report, but he doesn't verify the controls that produce the report.
Well,
I
that's
thought
a little
that,
shorthand, though, don't you think? Because he said
no,
they
I
do,
don't.
but they didn't exhaustively test every case, but they do run scenarios to ensure that the controls are there.
I saw from the auditors, I saw a set of matrices, i.e. worksheets, spreadsheets, that meticulously looked at a lot of controls. It wasn't rigorous enough to be classified as an internal control review, but was part of their standard procedure.
and my point is we should have an internal rigorous review. At this point, I move that we adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. We are adjourned.
True. And when checked, so it was proof that I wasn't losing my mind?
Oh, good. Now I can take my hearing aids off.
When we signed off and went to sign back in, it doesn't let you change the info.
That was
Yeah. There's a different.
Everything you said in your report was on the agenda? What's the point? For me, it has to be on the agenda?
You've got a letter that you've been asked.